As I'm sure you'll be aware, the major topic of discussion from our point of view at this summit was Brexit and finalising the withdrawal agreement and getting it over the line, which we're very keen to do. I'm satisfied with the draft conclusions which were agreed last night, and those conclusions say that we as the European Union endorse the withdrawal agreement. We'll proceed with its ratification and it's not open for renegotiation. We also re-emphasised our wish to develop a close relationship with the United Kingdom after it leaves the European Union, and that we want to embark on discussions on the future relationship as soon as the withdrawal agreement is ratified by Westminster. And we re-emphasised that we will make our best endeavours to ensure that it's concluded expeditiously so that it's not necessary to extend the transition phase or invoke the backstop. The European Council also underlined its support for the backstop as an insurance policy to avoid a hard border, and also emphasised that it had to form part of the withdrawal agreement. And I should say, even though this may not be fully appreciated, all of the 27 Prime Ministers and their delegations understand that the backstop relating to Ireland, the protocol in Ireland and Northern Ireland, is not just an Irish issue. It's there essentially for three reasons. It's there, first of all, to ensure that there's no hard border on our island between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, thus securing the peace and the Good Friday Agreement. Secondly, it's there to make sure that the open border doesn't become a backdoor to the single market. It's about the integrity of the single market as well, and making sure that that border, which will remain open, doesn't become the backdoor to the single market of the European Union, because it is, of course, not just a political border between Ireland and the United Kingdom. It's also a border between the European Union and what will become a third country. And it's there for a third reason as well, which is to make sure that no side is able to use the threat of a hard border as leverage in the negotiations on the future relationship, because the backstop, by definition, puts in place a legal assurance that there can never be a hard border on the island of Ireland, no matter what the circumstances. It's an all-weather guarantee, an insurance policy, that there will never be a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and that means that all sides can enter negotiations on the future relationship treaty without any concern that no matter what happens, it could lead to a hard border on the island of Ireland. So it takes that out of the equation, and that's why it's one of the three things that we decided 2 years ago had to be dealt with in the first phase of these negotiations. You recall it was citizens' rights, the financial settlement and the solution to the border, thus ensuring that all of those things were taken off the table and none of those things could be used as bargaining chips by any side when it comes to the negotiation of the future relationship treaty, the security partnership, the free trade agreement, all of those things that we're very keen to get started on as soon as Westminster and the European Parliament have ratified the withdrawal agreement. We'd also had a very good discussion yesterday on the next MFF, the next 5-year budget for the European Union. It was really an opportunity for all the different heads of governments to lay out their priorities, and I, of course, emphasised that priorities for Ireland included ensuring that the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, was well funded, and expressed the view that we should make it more environmentally orientated, particularly given the need to reduce CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector. I expressed my solidarity with the Mediterranean countries and the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, expressing our view that structural funds and cohesion policy should continue to be well funded. Ireland benefited enormously from EU funds being invested in our infrastructure, and that allowed us to bring our living standards in line with those of the rest of Western Europe. But 25 years since accession, since enlargement, many countries in the former Eastern Bloc and Central and Eastern Europe still haven't caught up in terms of living standards, and that's why we need to continue to have a well-funded cohesion policy, and expressed our support as net contributors to the budget in the next 5 years to maintaining funding for structural funds and cohesion. Also expressed the importance of continuing to fund Interreg well, which is really important for the regions, particularly the border region in Ireland, peace funding for Northern Ireland and the border as well, and also Erasmus, which is a very valuable programme for young people in particular, and Horizon, investment in research and development to make sure that we create the jobs and wealth of the future. Of course, as the Portuguese Prime Minister pointed out to me earlier today, everyone around the table says that they want all these programmes to be well funded, but we're not as willing to come forward with the money to fund them. So I did again state Ireland's position that we are willing to consider an increase in our contribution to the EU budget for the next MFF. But we believe that that can only happen if existing programmes like CAP, like cohesion policy, continue to be funded at their current levels. And we should use the new money that we're all willing to pay into the budget, or at least we're willing to pay into the budget, for those new priorities, such as migration, security and climate action. Again, a lengthy discussion this morning on migration. And it was noted in that discussion that illegal border crossings are now down to pre-crisis levels, and that does indicate some success in the policies that the European Union has pursued since the migration crisis. And again, Ireland, as you know, supports the three-pronged approach when it comes to migration and illegal migration, particularly that involves cooperation with source countries and with transit countries, it means strengthening external border security, Frontex, and also naval operations in the Mediterranean, and also means solidarity and burden sharing among member states. But once again, there really was no progress on reform of the European asylum system or the Dublin Convention. There's too many divided views on that to make progress at this stage. Had a discussion as well on external relations, expressed our support for Ukraine in particular in relation to the Crimea and the Sea of Azov, and also we look forward to the EU Arab Summit, which will happen in Sharm el-Sheikh in February, which actually is the next time that all of the EU Prime Ministers are scheduled to meet together around the middle or towards the end of February in Sharm el-Sheikh with our meeting with the Arab League. There was some concern that the Arab League is currently chaired by Saudi Arabia, and there was certainly a view around the table that we couldn't go to the EU Arab League summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in February and not talk about the Khashoggi murder or raise our concerns about it and not talk about Yemen. So we have decided to go ahead with the summit, but that rather than glossing over those issues, we're going to use the summit, among other things, as an opportunity to raise our concerns and our views with Saudi Arabia on that particular murder and also the ongoing events in Yemen. There was agreement on the text on climate change as well, following on from the work done in Katowice. Some discussion around disinformation and fake news in particular in the run-up to the European elections and the recent events in France, of course. And then the Eurozone summit, which just finished in the last couple of hours, I again expressed Ireland's support for the deepening and strengthening of the Eurozone. We're founder members of the Eurozone, as you know. Our support for progress on banking union, on a European deposit insurance scheme so that the deposits of people are guaranteed across Europe, not just by any individual sovereign, and also capital markets union. And as well as that, expressed support in principle for there being a Eurozone budget as a subset or a subdivision of the MFF, the overall European budget, and that should really focus on additional measures that would help the Eurozone economies to become more competitive and more productive. And we also took the view that as we go forward when it comes to Eurozone reform, we should do it in an inclusive format, particularly including those countries that aren't yet members of the Eurozone but do wish to become members of the Eurozone, particularly Croatia, which is next in line, I suppose, to join the Eurozone, and also Bulgaria as well. Also had a good meeting with the Portuguese Prime Minister this morning, talked about a lot of different things, bilateral issues, events in Brazil, the Mercosur trade deal. We both shared the view that because of the election of a protectionist president in Brazil, that the likelihood of concluding the Mercosur trade agreement is now less likely than it was before, which I think will be unwelcome news in general, but probably will be of some reassurance to Irish farmers who have particular concerns about the impact on the beef industry of Mercosur. Talked about tourism, talked about bilateral relations between the two countries, and various other things, and that was a very positive meeting. I hope to follow it up with a trip to Lisbon next year, which had to be rescheduled because of domestic business a week or two ago. So happy to take any questions.
Yeah, we'll start off with Tony Connolly from RTE. Thanks, Taoiseach. Last night, the statement on Brexit and the backstop seemed to be the final word on assurances. The assurances were provided. There was some explanation about the temporary nature of the backstop and so on. And there was a paragraph saying that the EU stood ready for further assurances that was dropped from the text last night. Yet today, Theresa May has said that the work is ongoing. There will be further assurances. What is your view? Is she correct? If so, what structure would those assurances take? Do you foresee perhaps another European Council in January to try and develop this idea? Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, there's no proposals for a special meeting in January. A lot of prime ministers were called to Brussels at short notice only a few weeks ago for a special summit on a Sunday in November, and I don't think they'd be willing to come to Brussels again unless we really had to. So the next meeting is scheduled for the end of March, and that's when it's going to happen, unless it's absolutely necessary. But of course, that's in the hands of President Tusk to decide whether there is going to be another meeting. But as things stand, the next meeting of the European Council will not take place until I think it's the 20th or 21st of March. On paragraph 5, there was no support for that paragraph, so it was deleted. And the reason why it was deleted really is that the view of the meeting was that paragraphs 3 and 4 contained very strong and very robust assurances about the Irish backstop and about our commitment as the European Union to proceed ASAP into talks about the future relationship treaty. And of course, if we can conclude the future relationship treaty, that's the trade deal, the security partnership, all of those things, well then we won't need to even think about extending the transition period or activation of the backstop. And we gave that commitment, and I think it's a very, very strong one. Obviously, I want to be as helpful as possible, and as I said this morning, we're very happy to offer explanations, assurances, to do things that can help with the ratification in Westminster, but there are limitations to that, and I discussed these with Prime Minister May in our meeting. Explanations, assurances, all of those things we can certainly talk about, but we can't get into a situation whereby we're contradicting anything that is in the legal text of the treaty that's been agreed by 28 member states.
But just to follow up, what would the structure of these continuing explanations be? The format?
Well, that I don't know. There is no specific format agreed on that, but it's relations are good. We're always happy to hear from the United Kingdom as to what their particular requests or asks are, but that is contingent on understanding that there are limitations. This is a legal agreement, 500 pages long. 28 member states have signed up to it, including the UK government. We can't have further guarantees or assurances or explanations that in any way contradict or render inoperable any part of the treaty that we've agreed.
Sean Defoe from News Talk, followed by Shona Murray.
Taoiseach, on the assurances, do you think that the EU has given enough now for Theresa May to go back and to actually convince MPs to get on board and get behind this deal, or is it going to take more? And Mr Juncker was talking last night about releasing documents relating to no deal next week. Obviously there was the cabinet memo that came around this week. Will you be releasing that now next week in line with the other EU plans?
Yeah, well, the short answer is I don't know if it's going to be enough for Westminster, but that was one of the questions that was asked by a lot of the prime ministers. What are you asking for? And if you give it to us, how can we be sure that it's going to be enough? Because we can't have a situation whereby any negotiating party, and this is true for any treaty or agreement, comes back every couple of weeks following discussions with their parliament, looking for something extra, looking for something more. You can't operate international relations on that basis. So that was a question that was asked by a lot of prime ministers. Is what you're asking for going to be enough? Because if it's not enough, then there's no point in giving it. And that was, so I guess we'll have to see what happens, and that's very much an issue for internal British politics. In terms of no deal preparation, I think it's important to say once again that Ireland and the European Union aren't threatening anyone with no deal. There's no threat of no deal from the European Union or from Ireland. It's entirely a sovereign decision of the United Kingdom as to whether they want to choose no deal or not. It is within the power of the United Kingdom either to revoke Article 50 or to seek an extension to Article 50, thus avoiding no deal. So Ireland, the European Union, we're not threatening anyone's economy, not threatening anyone's job, not threatening no deal. That's entirely a decision that the UK hopefully will not make. But that's a decision for them. But preparations have to be made. No matter what, we have to make those preparations. So the next step now is on the 19th of December, the European Commission will release its legislative proposals for no deal. The Taoiseach will meet with the stakeholders forum. I think it's on the 20th or 21st, next Thursday. And after that, we'll produce a further updated document from us on our domestic preparations. That will then be picked up again in January with the final seminar here in Brussels on no deal preparation. That's happening between the 10th and 15th of January. I'm going to release more information at that point as well.
Sean Murray.
Taoiseach, was Theresa May quite vague last night in what she was requesting from the EU? Because it just doesn't seem that anything really has advanced from this summit. And when you say, because you said a few times there that you could and you're happy to provide some assurances, you know, specifically, what do you mean by that?
Well, I suppose I don't fully know specifically, and again, it would be very useful for us as Ireland, as the European Union, to know from the United Kingdom what assurances, what guarantees, what explanations they need, and we would need to know that they would be sufficient to secure a majority in Westminster. But equally, they would need to know, and I think they do know, that it couldn't be anything that contradicts the legal text of the withdrawal agreement or renders any of it or any part of it inoperable. So I think there's a good understanding of that coming from here today.
Did she actually come forward with some proposals last night and they were rejected, or was it just that they weren't vague? Because again, nothing really substantial seems to have come out of it.
No, like there were suggestions, and as I think I said yesterday, some of them perhaps made sense, others would have been quite difficult. One of the suggestions is that we would commit to a particular date to have the future relationship treaty, that's the trade deal, agreed. And while we can commit to our best endeavours, while we can say we will absolutely work towards a particular target date, it's not possible to say in law that we'll definitely meet that date because, first of all, you have to negotiate it. Secondly, any future relationship treaty is going to be much more complicated than the withdrawal agreement, because not only will it have to be ratified by Westminster and the European Parliament, it'll have to be ratified by 28 member parliaments. So while we can absolutely give an assurance that we will begin negotiations on that trade deal, on that future relationship treaty, as soon as is possible, shortly after the withdrawal agreement is ratified, for us to make a legal commitment to have a deal done by a particular moment in time, that's not possible, because it's just not in our gift to promise that, and you can't promise something that isn't necessarily in your power to deliver.
Pat Leahy.
So is the ball essentially in Mrs May's court then to answer those two questions that you put to her last night, or that the leaders put to her last night, that what does she want, and will it be sufficient to get it through Westminster? Is that what you're saying, that it's up to her to come back here now?
Well, what I'm hoping will be the case is the very robust assurances that we've given in this communiqué agreed by 27 governments last night, the European Commission and the European Council. I'm hoping that the robust assurances that we've given in writing as the European Union, as 27 governments, will be sufficient for Westminster to ratify this agreement. If it's not, we'll have to take it from there.
Next question, Fiacro Keonig.
Taoiseach, Micheál Martin was over here yesterday, obviously the opposition leader. He was saying that, look, we're nearly at the stage now that a no-deal Brexit seems inevitable unless something changes quite drastically. And he suggested that there is going to be a need for a second budget next year, an emergency budget, because there is reportedly going to be a €3.6 billion hole in our budget if there is a no-deal Brexit. So just your response to that, are you open to a second emergency budget taking place next year?
Yeah, like I didn't hear him say that, so I know you're paraphrasing him. I don't think no deal is inevitable. I think we can get this deal over the line, and if we can't, obviously, the United Kingdom has the option of extending Article 50, as I mentioned earlier. So I think that no deal remains unlikely. but we still have to prepare for it, and I've outlined the preparations that we're making and the further information that we'll share with people next week and also in the middle of January. I don't believe that a mini budget will be necessary. We framed the budget with Brexit in mind. Bear in mind that the budget provides for a surplus next year. In fact, we'll probably have a surplus this year, but certainly will provide for a balanced budget and a surplus next year. Very few countries in the European Union are going to record a surplus next year, and it provides for a rainy day fund. So we framed the budget very much with Brexit in mind. And bear in mind the analysis of the SRI, which came out during the week. Now, it's only one organisation, it's only one analysis, and it's important not to put too much into any one analysis. But their analysis was that even in a no-deal hard Brexit scenario, the economy would continue to grow. But instead of growing by 6%, it would grow by 3%. The kind of environment in which you have mini budgets or emergency budgets is when you go into a serious recession, not when your economy grows by 3%. So we're confident that we won't have to have a new budget in any circumstances next year, and that we're well prepared for it.
John Downey.
Taoiseach, the British Prime Minister has spoken of the prospect of guarantees acquiring some kind of legal status. I noticed you avoided ruling that out yesterday when you spoke to us on the way in. There is ample precedent for it going back to 1992 with Denmark. It was used in 2009 to help Ireland ratify the Lisbon Treaty, more recently Netherlands and Wallonia. Do you have? Can you talk a bit about it, please?
First of all, we have a legal text, and that is the withdrawal agreement, a 500-page legal text, and we also have a joint political declaration which has enormous political weight. While there might be precedent in the past for protocols or legal instruments that offered countries that needed them further guarantees, there is no precedent for legal guarantees that in any way contradict or render inoperable any part of that particular treaty or agreement.
James Ward, Daily Mail.
Taoiseach, in her press conference earlier, Theresa May said that she felt that MPs would need more than what has been given at this summit. With that in mind, would you support an extension of Article 50 if necessary, and do you think that the 26 other leaders could?
First of all, that's a decision for the UK. If the UK makes that decision, well then we'd have to consider it. But ultimately, that's a decision for the UK. But I think it's fair to say that if the choice were between no deal and an extension of Article 50, I can't see many people not understanding that an extension would make more sense than no deal. It would be better, of course, that we get a deal and that we get that deal over the line before we reach that point. But as I say, no deal is totally avoidable for those reasons. Sorry, the second part of your question?
Would the other 26 leaders support it?
Again, can't speak for them, but obviously first preference is to get this deal over the line. But if for some reason it's not brought over the line, the option is there to extend Article 50. And while I can't speak for anyone else, I would think that faced with the choice between Article 50 extension and no deal, people would opt for the extension. But again, totally a matter for the UK to make that call. I'm not asking them to do it. Entirely their decision.
Next question to Rochelle from the FT, and then finally to BBC Wales.
Thank you very much. Theresa May was stressing in her press conference that she was going home with something from here, and was implying that there was some legal weight to the draft conclusions. I'm just wondering, what do you think she was taking away when she went home?
Well, I think what she's going home with is two very strong assurances, and they're there in the conclusions that were agreed by 27 member states last night. First of all, we're committing to begin negotiations ASAP on the future relationship treaty. That's the trade deal, the security partnership, willing to begin them as soon as possible after the withdrawal agreement is ratified. And secondly, giving that assurance again that we will work to make sure that treaty is done and ratified so that we never need to get to the point of considering an extension to the transition period or activating the backstop. But again, explaining why Europe and Ireland need that backstop to be there. It's not just about protecting the peace process and avoiding a hard border, which is the main reason for it. It's also important for our European partners as well, so that the open border does not become the back door to the single market, and that's why it's not possible to remove it from the treaty, and that can't be considered.
Is there legal weight to those draft conclusions?
I suppose you have to ask a lawyer that one. There's certainly conclusions from a European Council meeting are serious stuff. It's not a press statement. These are conclusions from a European summit agreed by. I don't mean to suggest that press statements aren't serious stuff, by the way, but we meet 4 times a year and we produce these conclusions, and they carry a lot of weight, and we mean them. So they certainly have depth and meaning. If that answers the question, and we do mean it.
Have legal effects.
Again, that's really a question for the legal service, I'm afraid.
Final question to BBC Wales.
Yeah, hi. You talked about ramping up.
It's as good as, though, if that answers your question.
So you talked about ramping up preparations now for a no-deal Brexit. I was just wondering if you could give us a sense of what that would mean for Wales's economy and obviously important trade links with Ireland.
Do you mean in terms of the preparations, or in terms of the
what sort of plans you have for the ports, for instance?
Yeah, like the kind of things that will have to be done, particularly on that east-west dimension, which is really important for Wales with Fishguard and Holyhead and Swansea. 4 elements really. The first is the hiring of customs officials, SPS inspectors, veterinary inspectors, and health officials. So we've done that. We'll have at least 200 in place by March. We can do more if we need to because we have a panel of 3,000. So that's the staffing. The second is the infrastructure. Infrastructure will need to be put in place at the ports and airports to provide for goods to be checked. The third is legislation. And then the fourth is really kind of public information notices. So all that is very much underway in Ireland anyway.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for coming.